So without further ado, let me introduce this evening's session. I'm Marion and I'm the co-chair of the Co-operative Party's Youth Network, along with Olivia, who's also on the call this evening. Tonight we're going to be discussing some cooperative approaches to tackling climate change. Climate change was found to be one of the top priorities for young voters at the last general election, and it's one of the Youth Network's priority campaigns for this year. Put simply, it's an issue we cannot afford to ignore. So with that in mind, we're hoping to take your ideas from this session and create a policy pamphlet on climate change to feed into the party's wider work. So I'd encourage you all to get involved in this evening's discussion. You can tweet along during the event using the hashtag CoopOnline20. So let me introduce our speakers who will be giving a short speech, and then you'll get the chance to answer them some questions. You can ask a question by typing into the chat box, and then I'll put them to our panelists once they've had a chance to speak. You can put a question in the chat box at any time, so if you think of something while one of our speakers is speaking, just pop it in and we'll get to the questions. So this evening we are joined by Dr. Afshin Rashid, MBE. She's the co-founder, director and CEO of Repowering London, chair of Community Energy England and a board trustee for Friends of the Earth. She's also former senior policy advisor at the Department of Energy and Climate Change. Dr. Rashid is a community energy specialist. She was awarded an MBE in 2016 for her work delivering renewable energy to deprived communities in London. We're also joined this evening by Isha Azim. She's one of the coordinators for the Manchester Youth Strikes. She's a former youth MP for Manchester, and she's also a member of the Greater Manchester Youth Authority. She's a passionate campaigner on environmental issues, and I'm also informed that she went to a co-op school, so she's definitely knowledgeable in all things cooperatives. And last but not least, we have Councillor Tom Hayes. I know some of you might be expecting Luke Pollard's MP. Unfortunately, Luke can't be with us this evening because he has to be in Parliament. However, we've got wonderful replacements. Kindly agreed to step in at short notice. Tom's a Labour and Cooperative Councillor in Oxford, as well as Deputy Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member for Green Transport and Zero Carbon Oxford. Tom's been doing some quite interesting stuff on air pollution. Some of you might remember his excellent speech at last year's conference in Glasgow. So we go first to Dr. Rashid. Can you tell us some cooperative solutions to creating greener communities?
Great, thank you. I'm going to obviously share examples and my experience of leading Repowering London. And at Repowering, as you know, we specialise in community energy, and our projects create clean energy and renewable energy, as well as that social energy that brings people together and creates that resilience, empowered citizens. So the solar power stations on social housing blocks that we've installed in community buildings are owned by local people, and the income generated from these schemes stay in the local community, and profits are used to tackle fuel poverty and training opportunities for young people. And our roots are in Brixton, and our work is really focused on working in challenging urban environments, inner cities, and really closely working with underrepresented and hardly reached communities. We're a cooperative, and so we as a cooperative embed cooperative principles in everything we do. So that kind of that democratic one member, one vote, that inclusive model, that community-led model has really been why we've been successful over the many years, and why we've gone from working in one neighbourhood, one estate in Brixton, to several neighbourhoods and boroughs across London. And what we've seen is, particularly during this crisis, that these community-led and these cooperative approaches has really been valuable in shaping our response, and particularly how we as an organisation provide a service to our communities. And of course, here we're here to discuss about the climate change and the biggest crisis that we face, which is the climate crisis. And we know there is strong support, public support and appetite for creating a cleaner, a positive, a greener and a fairer, just society. And in response to that, we've seen local authorities that have, made their declarations, and some having ambitious targets of getting to net zero even before the national government targets of 2050, which is great, but these also present its own challenges and things that we need to be mindful of. Particularly the climate crisis in itself is quite daunting and disempowering at times at an individual level, but also at an organizational level. And we really need a step change in the resources, the finances, and the skills that we bring to solving this problem. But the beauty about what we do in community energy is that it brings people together, in creating those local solutions, and it links individuals to that wider collective action. And it also creates those local solutions designed by people to tackle those global issues like climate change. So I really find like it is, so there are approaches there to help us, solve and come together in tackling this crisis. The other key important point that we need to kind of obviously address is being inclusive and fair. And we need to make sure that people aren't left behind. And we know that those with the smallest carbon footprint and those who can't afford to heat their homes during the winter are often those who are not included in decision making or designing those solutions. And I just wanted to draw, a fact here, which was published recently in the UK. In every year from 2003 to 2017, households in the white ethnic group were less likely to be in fuel poverty than those from other ethnic groups. And this is really big. And it's just an example of how these injustices are disbalanced. And as a Brixton-based organisation, we support the Black Lives Matter movement and stand in solidarity with those who are addressing these injustices. And I wanted to share some solutions, some of the things that we have been doing from the last few years. We work with communities and schools and installing solar panels on these in the community, in these local neighborhoods, which is reducing carbon emissions, is providing clean electricity to these sites. Our schemes are financed through community shares, so people get a chance to kind of invest and own the asset. And we're mindful that obviously not everyone will have funds and finances to invest in these schemes. So what we make sure to be inclusive is that we offer £1 membership, so that people who can't invest can still join the co-op and have an equal say with those who are putting in the tens or the hundreds of investment in it. And of course, by working with schools, we're connecting with young people, we're running workshops, assemblies with young people to raise awareness, to include them in the design and development of these projects. We run a youth training program, again, building that skills and knowledge in our future generations and providing those essential skills for people to have jobs in the future and know that there are opportunities out there for them. And particularly on tackling fuel poverty, I must say that what's been my proudest moment is that our champions who are locally rooted and they're in it's a paid role, that they really shaped our response at the time when the crisis hit, as to making sure that our flyers got out to those people who needed it the most, who needed that support and advice in switching tariffs or writing off their debts on their energy bills. They shaped the response, and our web resources, the information, how we connected with all the local agents and organizations. And I think that to me kind of reinforced that message about the community are best placed to kind of offer the right solutions to face the crisis that we're dealing with today.
Thanks, Afshin. That was really interesting. Sounds like you're doing lots of really cool stuff there. I've noticed that we've been joined by Alex Sobel MP. Alex is the Labour and Co-operative MP for Leeds North West. He's also a member of the Environmental Audit Committee and is campaigning for better transport in and around Leeds. So Alex, if you don't mind, could you maybe say a little bit about what Labour's doing in Parliament and what you're doing in Leeds to help tackle climate change?
Absolutely. We're sort of at a stage here where the government's own plans are failing. So we're heading into a period where the government is trying to show into global climate leadership. It has secured the International Climate Change Conference happening next year. It was meant to be now, basically, but obviously because of COVID, it's been delayed. So it's this time next year in Glasgow. And the government's own carbon budgets, the Committee on Climate Change is predicting that with the government policies and the progress they're making, they'll fail to meet their own fourth and fifth carbon budgets in the next two, third, the fourth and fifth of the next two carbon budgets. And Labour's bringing forward policies not just to support us catching up, and those carbon budgets are based on the Paris Agreement targets, but to surpass those, and so that we reach net zero in the 2030s. And that means that we need revolution. You know, people like to call it a green industrial revolution or a Green New Deal, or it doesn't really matter what you call it. They're just, you know, names, although that's helpful in terms of public perception, but it's about the actions that count. So, you know, the sort of things that Labour, and we're in an early stage, obviously, of planning, but the sort of things that we're looking at is a transformation of our energy system works, rollout of green hydrogen, you know, reintroducing feed-in tariffs and solar panels. So today I spoke to Northern Power Grid, and they said that installations had fallen through the floor of new solar installations because, and it's a massive issue for energy co-ops, this, if you put the panels on the roof and you're an energy co-op, you've got to repay that money. You don't benefit from the domestic electricity. So you need the feed-in tariff or some form of payment for the excess energy going into the grid to repay that installation cost, and for the co-op to be able to reinvest and put more solar panels on more roofs. So those are the sort of things that Labour's looking at around energy, also around house building. You know, we do need houses. We need particularly, you know, need more social housing. We're committed to building tens of thousands of new homes every year. But the way that we build housing now is slow, it's leaky. There are a lack of standards. The last Labour government brought in the Code of Sustainable Homes. It was immediately scrapped by the coalition. And then to be fair, the Liberals are not very fair. They then, with the coalition, then brought a new set of low carbon home standards. And then as soon as they lost in 2015, it was scrapped by the majority Tory government. So we've had 10 lost years around carbon, low carbon housing, and Labour's going to catch up. And I'm particularly interested, I'm sort of Alan Whitehead in our Bays team around modular housing. And again, that's a huge opportunity for new housing co-ops. If we can get some land, if local authorities can invest some lands in housing co-ops, those new houses can cost as little as £30,000 for a 2-bed unit, and they can be erected in as little as 6 weeks. So you do the groundwork and you do the building at the same time. So those actually are the sort of things that we're seeing in Leeds. So that last example, something that's happening right now in West Leeds, where St George's Crypt, which is a homeless charity, is building, I think, 70 houses of that model, really cheap, for people who are currently homeless, who are going through sort of foyer type. So they got through support, they are now able to go and live in their own home with support, are building the houses, and those houses will be passive house standard houses. So we're seeing those things on the ground, but you can't scale those things up without state support, state subsidy, without changes in the regulatory environment. And we're never going to reach net zero just with the hope that the market's going to provide. And companies are changing, but they're changing too slowly, and they're doing it without any threat to their own profit level. They're actually doing it because they're worried about things like what are called stranded assets. I'll give an example. And this is again something the co-op movement can campaign on. But if you've built a gas refinery, you then in 20 years, if we've decarbonised home heating and gas, and we don't use gas anymore, natural gas, then that is a stranded asset, because it's just, you've paid for it, you've built it, and it is just dead. You can't use it, and that actually is a huge cost. And that's why, for instance, insurance industry, the insurance costs of those sort of facilities have gone up. And again, and although not in the investment industry so much, but they are beginning to come around to this idea they can't build these fossil fuel resources, stranded assets, in quite short order. So those are sort of things, again, that we in the co-op movement, those are sort of things cooperatives never do. Only capitalist corporations would make decisions like that. So those sort of things that both, in terms of Labour's approach and things we can do locally and things we can campaign on. And that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So, but I know that you've got lots of other speakers, so I'll stop there.
Thank you, Alex. And I know you've got to get off in a little bit, so I thought I'd bring you in first. Next, can we go to Isha? Can you tell us what you've been doing in Manchester, some of the things you've been campaigning on with the youth strike?
Yes, of course. So in Manchester, we've been very busy. There are quite a few things we've got going on. So one of the things I do is I'm a coordinator of the Manchester Youth Strikes. So what that is last February, a group of young people decided to go out in St. Peter's Square in Manchester and start striking for climate changes. Ever since then, it's become more of a formal organisation. It's just a few of us, and we've decided to create a proper group out of it. So we've got a lot more volunteers now. We've got a newsletter up and running. We've started to take our own initiative, and we've decided to form our own organisation because the people in power aren't listening to our climate demands. So we thought we'd formalise it and create a proper organisation. Recently, we had a what do you call it? It's like a big day of action. That's what we call it, with Fridays of Future. And we had one last September, and our turnout was about 3,000, 4,000 people. So we felt very encouraged, very supported. We had like a massive stage. We had different speakers. Anyone is allowed to speak, you know, young and old. Our supporters tend to be young people predominantly because it's a young face that's mobilizing, but you do get a lot of parents there at strikes and a lot of young, very young children like toddlers and things like that. We've also had a virtual day of action, but we had to cancel it because of the whole situation with the COVID crisis. So we had it online instead. And what we did was we made it a 2-hour event, and we all got to talk about climate issues, and we got to share like people's express. So I think one of the things that we forget with young people is that we think to talk about the climate change movement, we have to articulate it, and that's not necessarily the right medium for every young person. So at our summit, we had people who were rapping, people who were singing, people who had poetry, people who wanted to express themselves through different forms of art, which I think is really important because not every young person or adult is the same and responds to the same kind of message that's being given. Another thing we've got going on is, so I'm part of the Greater Manchester Youth Combined Authority, and we held a Green Summit with Andy Burnham. It was supposed to be in person, but with COVID, it was online. It was very successful. Greater Manchester has 10 local areas which got involved. A lot of young people attended, and the feedback was amazing. A lot of young people were engaged, young and old again, and they really enjoyed the workshops we had. All the workshops were created by young people, and that helped to give it that kind of youth voice and youth appearance. A lot of organisations tend to say it's youth focused, but it actually isn't. So it's really good to see that the Greater Manchester Youth Combined Authority is making sure that youth voice is at the forefront of what they're doing. Also, another scheme we have going on is, so I'm also with the Manchester Youth Council, and the scheme that we have is, it's called a climate green wheel. And what this is an initiative that we came up with to engage young people from different areas. So with climate change, you tend to get the people who actually care about the issue. And what we wanted to develop is people who actually don't even care about climate change. So the green wheel is something accessible for every young person, regardless of what power or what place you have. So for example, you've got the inner circle, which are the things that like people in power can do, politicians. So for example, MPs can bring forward motions, bring forward private members' bills. And then on the outer ring, you have actions that any young person like myself could do. For example, switching off the lights if you're not in a room, or types. So with this green wheel, we're planning to launch it Manchester wide at least, and to let every young person know that they can make a contribution to the climate crisis. They can do something that will help in their own way. Another thing we have going on in Manchester is we have the Posh Ambassador Scheme. Now, the Posh Ambassador Scheme is something run by Youth Focus Northwest. So Youth Focus Northwest gave an allocated amount of money to each youth council, and they've allowed us to run a climate-centered scheme. So POSH stands for Pioneers of Sustainable Hope. And what the point of that is to go into schools in Manchester and teach students face to face about the impacts of climate change and what campaigns you can run. So with our youth council, we decided to run the green wheel, and we've also got our members going into schools and delivering presentations about the crisis and why it's such a big deal, and hopefully educating students and pupils about the impacts and why it's such a big deal. For me, I feel like a lot of people think that it's a boring issue, and as someone, I am very interested in politics. A lot of people think that issues like Brexit or like the COVID crisis are more important, and I think that's quite short-sighted. I think that the environment crisis is a really important issue, and it is pressing now more than ever. And I think it's quite interesting because people say that young people tend to be short-sighted, and I think in this situation the adults are now being more short-sighted because they're not, a lot of the people in power who can make the decisions are not realizing that we need to do something about it. in Manchester again last year, when I was Youth MP, we helped to pass a climate emergency motion. So Manchester has committed to being carbon neutral by 2038, and that was a monumental success for us. But since then, I'm not really sure what's actually happening to make sure we meet that target. So I think that as young people, we need to keep pressing on the people in power and say that, of course, you are passing certain things to make sure we have targets, but it's about also making sure we have steps to achieve those targets. Otherwise, it's just meaningless. Another scheme I'm working on, this is the final one, is a climate app, and that's basically going to launch hopefully in December, COVID dependent. And what it is that we're creating an app, and I think the target audience is like 12 to 15, and we're hoping that people in Manchester and hopefully more nationwide will get involved with the app. So the app is supposed to tell you about your local area and what you can do in the area to improve your carbon footprint in your household as well. So you can like create challenges and quizzes. So it's like interactive, and you also get to like learn about little videos as well. And the more activities you complete that are like carbon neutral or helping save the environment, you get points, and then it's like a leadership board as well. And you can like redeem the points for like vouchers as well in real life with sustainable charities. For example, Sainsbury's has signed up, so that's like one place where you could get a voucher for if you end up being more sustainable. So it's a little incentive, and it's a very big source of pride to have an app, because young people have apps for everything, have a lot of apps as well. And I think this is something that will really hit home with a lot of people. While the target audience is a lot younger than I am, I think it's something that even adults can use, and children younger, if they want to get involved with it. And I think there's a lot of potential for that kind of app to help people track what their carbon footprint is, what small changes they can make in their local area to make a difference. And I'm really excited for the project to go forward.
Thanks, Isha. That sounds absolutely amazing. Last but not least, we'll go to Councillor Tom Hayes. Tom, can you give us the perspective from local government? What's the cooperative solutions to tackling climate change there?
Thanks, Marion. It's great to be on a panel listening to all those inspiring tales of the action that's taking place cooperatively. So I'll do my best to add to it. Like most cities in the UK and around the world at this time, Oxford is experiencing 3 different challenges. The first is the long-term health and road safety impacts of air pollution and road safety. The second is the climate emergency that many councils up and down the country have declared and are now taking action to meet. And the third is the pandemic. And I think the solution to all of those 3 challenges is a cooperative solution. And I think the cooperative solution to each of those 3 challenges can also help to achieve solutions to the wider set of problems that we face. So in Oxford, when we started on our new journey to meeting the climate emergency, following the declaration of a climate emergency, the new journey was unique to us because it was basically staring facts in the face and trying to figure out how we could go further and faster. The City Council had already played a major role over the last 15 years in helping Oxford to reduce its carbon emissions by 40%. We had helped to reduce air pollution levels over the previous 7 years by 26%. And our own council had reduced its own emissions by 10% in the previous year and 40% over the last 4 years. And we had done that by innovating a whole series of cooperative solutions. And we took those solutions and our desire to go further and faster into the first Citizens' Assembly by a UK city, which convened last year. We brought together 50 people with a range of viewpoints and backgrounds, and we put to them some significant questions about how the City Council could play a role in going further and faster and bringing the whole of the city along with us. Because one of the key challenges that will face us in meeting the climate emergency is not how you force change on people, but rather how you help to create net zero carbon citizens, how you bring people along on that journey, and so that everyone feels like they can play their part. And so as part of the Citizens' Assembly, we explored 5 themes. We explored the emissions from buildings, from energy, from waste management, from biodiversity, and also from transportation. And so looking at buildings, we saw that buildings are responsible for 81% of Oxford's emissions problem. We can't fix our carbon problem in Oxford, our contribution to the global problem, if we don't fix our buildings. And so we looked out at what we're doing and we realized that we actually have some fantastic work, as ever in the cooperative way, happening under the radar. We've got a co-op called Transition by Design, which is an architectural company. It's adept at coming up with architectural solutions for our buildings problem, both for new builds, but thinking ahead to how we can retrofit our existing stock. And so there's a big piece of work going on in the council now to look at our 9,000 council homes, because we did not outsource any of our responsibility for our homes. We wanted to keep them in stock, and figuring out how we, with our tenants, can make sure that they are zero carbon stock. And we're also bringing forward passive house standard housing in the city. We're then looking also at energy, where we have, as a city council, funded to the tune of around £7 million, something called the Low Carbon Hub, which is a social enterprise which had started small 10 years ago at helping to put solar panels on buildings and on schools, and is now involved in a £40 million investment called Project Energy Super Hub, which is helping, frankly, to install a big bloody battery in Oxford, which can supply more energy to local homes, but also generate renewable energy. And we're also looking out, in terms of waste management, at the association of 70 plus community action groups, many of which are co-ops or social enterprises, which help to promote food reuse, avoid waste disposal in unsanitary and unenvironmental ways, and to promote as much as possible the growth of food in our own communities and the eating of it among our communities. We also have our transportation approach, which is defined not just by the effort to bring in a zero emission zone to restrict polluting vehicles into the city centre, or connecting Oxford, which is our attempt to introduce bus gates and a workplace parking levy to restrict car use. But such co-ops as Broken Spoke Bike Co-op, which help to fix bikes up for people so that they can buy cheaper bikes, helps to provide Syrian refugees and younger and more disadvantaged people with something which keeps them busy and contributes to the social good. And also during the time of pandemic, helped to give bikes to NHS and frontline workers so that they were able to get around quickly and sustainably to their hospitals, and from their hospitals to their homes. And where we're at now is basically figuring out, having convened a citizens assembly, building on our track record of success, and looking out to how we implement the 53 recommendations of the assembly, how we fund this. We'd originally committed a £19 million budget over 4 years, but now my council is facing austerity on steroids from the government. Having promised that they would give local government all the resources and money that we needed, the national government have backtracked really quite quickly on that. And so my council is not just seeking funding to cover the existing costs that we've incurred to meet our responsibilities and protect our communities, but actually the further costs which will come from wave 2 and wave 3 of the pandemic, waves that didn't need to happen, but happening because of the government's historic mismanagement of this pandemic. And so what we're doing now is looking to not just pick up our work already that was untrained, but to reset elements of it in a new funding environment, and to do that as much as possible by bringing in the cooperative sector and helping to grow that sector to an even greater extent, so that we can all meet the challenges of not just the climate emergency, but also the pandemic. And I think I'm going to stop there so that we can take questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Tom. That's great. We've had loads of questions come in. Seems like people are really, really interested in what you've all been talking about this evening. So our first question is from Charlie, who's asked, what separates the cooperative approach from other plans to tackle climate change? If we go to Dr. Rashid first, don't mind.
Sure. Sorry, can you just repeat that? What's the question?
It's Charlie who asks what separates the cooperative approach from other plans in tackling climate change.
Well, I think I kind of mentioned it slightly in my talk, which is really about it being a community-led approach, and where people in a local area are essentially designing solutions that are most relevant and likely to be adopted from those living in their area, because they know best. And it's, you know, the climate crisis, it's obviously, it's quite complex, and a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. So we really need to have a mixture of solutions, even from a technical point of view. You know, we can't just kind of adopt one particular solution. Working in London and inner cities, we know that solar panels are a better technological solution as opposed to you know, wind that might be suitable in rural areas. And likewise, you know, as Aisha was highlighting, you know, the messaging for different communities will be different, the way you access communities, the way you encourage people to get involved. That community-led design, co-design process is really essential. And to me, I think, communities really bring that expertise and collaboration as well in those local contexts that really makes it quite unique from other approaches. And not to mention it's not profit driven as well.
That's brilliant. Alex, do you want to jump in on that question?
Yeah, I think I'll start where Afshin just finished. So I think there's a real big underlying point on this. Most of our emissions globally are driven by large corporations which are shareholder owned, and the point of those businesses, although they might make a product or deliver a service which people want and like, well, they obviously do because people buy them, but their underlying purpose is to drive shareholder value and profit. And that driving a shareholder value and profit is at the expense of our natural environment and at the expense of climate, and always looking for the cheapest possible way of working. So, we talk a lot about that, how that undermines workers' rights, but it also undermines climate, because the cheapest way of operating still is through the extraction of fossil fuels and burning them. And also on houses, building leaky houses, because that's the sort of default position of the 20th century. We haven't flipped the switch. We need to flip the switch, and part of that flipping the switch is around having different models of governance and ownership. And part of that solution is the states, but a bigger part of that solution is people powered, and that is cooperative solutions. And the underlying, the International Cooperative Association, ICA, principles underline a different approach. And those 9 principles don't explicitly talk about the environment alone, but that approach underlines an approach must support the environment and must support reducing carbon, as well as obviously involving stakeholders, whether it's the community or the workers. It's an important underlying principle, and ownership should not be separated from effect. And I think that is a depoliticization of climate politics. And it's unusual for anyone in the climate movement to do this. When Greta Thunberg refused to do that the other week, I think it was missing a point where we can, because it will slow down our ability to reach net zero. We need to take on the politics of this as well as the climate science.
Thanks, Alex. Can we go to Isha next?
Sorry, could you repeat what the question was, if that's okay?
Yeah, no problem. It's what separates the cooperative approach from other plans for tackling climate change?
So in terms of a cooperative approach, I can only speak on my experiences from a co-op school. I think when I think about the co-op, I think of community. I think that in terms of cooperative approach, it would be more community-led, like Afshin said. In terms of party politics wise, I was lucky enough to attend a climate session for the Labour conference and for the Conservative conference, and attending the Co-op conference as well allows me to then contrast between them, what party is perhaps contributing more or giving more time towards the climate crisis. And I think the cooperative is somewhere that's quite welcoming, and I think it's got a lot of values that a lot of young people do tend to resonate with. Not that says of my political affiliation personally, but I think in terms of democracy, in terms of fairness, and in terms of making sure that young people are heard and making sure that every voice is heard in the community, no matter how small or how big, I think that's what I like about the cooperative approach. And I think in terms of the climate crisis, that won't be something different. That will be something that the cooperative will follow, and I agree with that.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but not least, Tom.
Thanks. I think it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because you can focus down on what is unique about the Cooperative Party, but also compare it with the other parties. So to my mind, looking at the local government level here, when Conservatives talk about action on climate change, climate breakdown, what they actually do is usually say, oh, I care about the environment, but, and the but is the thing which stops them actually getting on with doing anything. When I think about the Liberal Democrats in my local area, I'm struck of meetings that I go into where they basically say, oh, we really do care about the climate breakdown, but we believe in free liberty, and we don't think you should put EV charging points in that particular parking bay because it might infringe on somebody's liberty. And they don't in any way believe in the collective good that can be brought from having an EV charging point on the street, which all the cars on that street can benefit from. And then I think about the Labour Party, and in recent years it has been quite a top-down party. It has thought very much in that lens, and I'm very excited by the fact that it seems to be thinking much more in a bottom-up way, which is a cooperative way. And I think that's what distinguishes the Co-op Party's approach and the cooperative approach generally. It's about the recognition that we, yes, do need to build a new economy. It has to be an inclusive economy, exactly as Alex was saying. It can't be beholden to big business, which are extractive and don't put the long-term interests of the planet and people at its heart, but rather think about short-term profit maximization. But we also think about growing communities at the very local level. And I think local councils have a key role to play here. We're an undervalued part of levels of government generally, particularly in recent years. And I think given that we play such a major role in placemaking and bringing communities together, we create physical spaces and virtual spaces where strangers can come together and share their views and enter into dialogue, which through the area of difference helps to arrive at a new place, which is a better place and helps you to find solutions. Local government has a really critical role to play. And I think if I'm going to boil it down to a strapline, it's that the Co-op Party thinks human. You know, we recognize that global warming is itself a global problem. It's an order of magnitude far above most of the problems that we face, and that's disempowering. It can make people feel like we shouldn't be taking steps in our own lives because China's not doing something or America's not doing something. Actually, the co-op focus is that every human on the planet can do something. And more importantly, if we join together with other humans, we can share our skills and our knowledge in our head, and we can join together our resources, which is especially important when we're saying that one of the major problems contributing to global warming and the climate problem we face is the fact that we overuse resources. If we can actually share some of our resources, if we can think about unique ways of organizing society and our economy, which is more of a sharing economy, then we can not just tackle the climate problem we face, but we can actually build communities of belonging and create a connection with each other, which effectively is at the heart of cooperation, which is at the heart of the Co-op Party. So I say more co-op and less Tory.
Brilliant. I'm sure that's something we can all get on board with. So we've had a few questions come in on Alex's comments about house building. So I just wanted to raise them. So we've had both Danny and Sam who've asked about what can we do to make sure that houses in the future are more sustainable, and also how can the cooperative movement link up with private businesses to make sure that we can really make this scalable and across the country.
So in the short term, there are some issues. So the Tories are actually liberalising planning law, which actually takes us away from where we want to be. But a future Labour government, you know, and a Co-op Party manifesto should certainly be calling for a return for the Code of Sustainable Homes and a ratcheting up, because we don't want to go to where the Labour Party would have implemented in 2010. We need a much higher level. And in terms of how co-ops could work with the private sector, there is really good examples of this. So there's, for instance, Building Community Housing, which is a development trust in Hull, which is on a co-op model. It's got a really interesting model, actually. I'll just take it, you'll find it interesting, is that it covers a geographic area, an estate in Hull, quite near the city centre. And every single resident in that area, based on the electoral register actually, gets a vote on who the board is. So it's a little bit like, and it's more or less the same as a council board. It's not quite big as a council, most council board. So they get to directly elect the board, and then the board obviously run it on their behalf like a co-op. And they set up this community housing that, because the council weren't building housing, the council didn't have resources. They had some resources and they could get investment in a different way because they were separate from the council. And actually they had land which they owned as development. And what they did was they designed and then commissioned a former caravan or a caravan factory, which is a private sector caravan factory in East Yorkshire, not far away, to build these low carbon homes. They now have over 100 low carbon homes on the estate, and that's growing. That's growing because they're building them, reinvesting, and working on the spare land they've got. And that's a model actually across the country for co-ops that already have potential to buy land or to get land from the council or a community asset transfer, and to utilise those sort of things. And there are similar factories in other parts of the country which co-ops could partner with to build these sorts of houses.
Thanks, Alex. Can we go to Afshin next, because I know you've done some work with local councils in your role in the third sector. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, we work, most of the local authorities we've been working with based in London. And it's, I think it's as cooperatives, as organizations working in the community, that collaboration and partnership with the local authority is absolutely key to enable us to kind of do what we need to do, and equally where you've got shared and aligned objectives. So we've been, as an organisation, we were actually incubated within Lambeth Council to start with, to get our ambitions off the ground and to get going, and then we're established independently to be able to provide the essential services. And just today we were having this great conversation to, how can we work, hand in hand together to benefit from the opportunities right now, be it the Green Homes Grant, and make sure that us, through our local links in the community, where we've got these really champions who are locally rooted, and we're working with organizations providing essential services, how can we find individuals who are most likely to benefit from some of those kind of measures and offers that are available at that moment. So it's that kind of, working together and working collaboratively is really important. Local authorities, and I'm sure Tom's experience of working with Low Carbon Hub is similar, have got access to a lot of assets and sites where community groups like ours, we can raise the finance, we can install the solar panels, and we can collaborate in making sure that our limited resources, be it financial or even resources in terms of skills and expertise, we can come together and achieve those objectives together, and bring people on board in that journey. So I think it's a really essential collaboration, that if we really want to make those changes and achieve those targets, particularly from a local authority perspective, and to bring people on board, more people on board, we need that collaboration, really.
Thanks very much, that's brilliant. And Tom, can you talk a little bit about how you're tackling house building in Oxford, how you're making sure that new homes are sustainable, whether that's the materials they use or whether in post-occupancy that they help people reduce their carbon footprint?
Absolutely. I would really want to build on the point that Alex has made around the enormous threat that the government are posing to local democratic control and our own abilities to meet our environmental standards through the proposed planning reforms. The planning reforms won't just scrap the affordable housing requirement, which is particularly devastating for Oxford. Oxford requires 40% council housing on sites with 10 or more units. The proposals by the government would require that there would need to be 50 or more units on sites before you even get into the affordable housing requirement. But it also would compromise our own council's ability to meet our tight environmental standards. We've just published and had signed off our local plan to 2036, which is a really big stellar piece of work by our planning lead in the cabinet. And that commits to 70% tighter standards on environmental protection than the government's own standards. The government passed into law this net zero target for 2050, but have we seen an action plan? Have we seen any sort of a sense of what they're proposing to invest in zero carbon housing or a mass retrofitting program? I mean, this came up very clearly in the Citizens' Assembly on climate change that convened last year. When we put it to the Assembly, do you think the government ought to start a mass program of house building which is zero carbon? They didn't just come back and say in 100%. There wasn't just that 100% came and said, yes, we believe that. It was in the voice of one person which really stuck with me, which is, it's just stupid not to. Why would you not introduce those standards so that 10 or so years down the line, you have to spend even more money to retrofit it? And when it's a stroke of a pen decision and you're already squandering billions of pounds, why would you not concentrate those billions of pounds for actual social and environmental good, which help you to get so far down the road to meeting your own environmental standards? I mean, it's a no-brainer. So we need the government to step up to their responsibilities. We also need them to properly fund local government to introduce council housing on a mass scale and to build the homes that only local government can really build to the highest environmental standards. We need them to abandon their really dumb planning reforms as urgently as they possibly can, because it jeopardizes the one area of government which is cracking on with environmental action, which is local government. And they also need to support local councils to do as we already are in Oxford, which is to build on our links with the Low Carbon Hub. We just heard the reference to it from another speaker. The Low Carbon Hub is a really amazing piece of organisation. You have local people owning shares in a social enterprise, and as a consequence, buying the infrastructure for renewable energy generation, but also owning shares in renewable energy generation as a consequence, which means that the more energy that you generate renewably and locally, the less you are going to have to spend money on the big six energy firms, which are mostly foreign owned, often by oligarchs, and involve sending billions of pounds out of the county. It just makes sense to invest locally, invest socially, and invest cooperatively. And really, government just needs to step up and make what is patently obvious to everybody else more of a reality for the country.
Thanks, Tom. I certainly agree with some of the points that you've made there. You know, it just makes sense that we build sustainable homes now rather than just storing up problems for the future. We've got a really good questions coming from Emily. She's asked, beyond just voting, how can young people push for better approaches to climate change? What sort of things can young people get involved with? So I'm going to go to Isha for this one.
I think there's so much you can do as a young person. I only turned 18 during the pandemic, so I started all this climate activism started last year, but then I've been an activist technically since I was like in early high school. I think as a young person, you're constantly told by the media and by grown-ups that, oh, you're not important because you're only important and you're only visible when you turn 18, because that's when all the marketing is at you because you're now a new voter. And I think that so many young people then themselves write themselves off and think that we're not valued because we're being told we're not valued. And I think that's completely wrong. I think as a young person, a lot of people don't realize potential, and young people can do so many other things. I think especially with the climate movement and Black Lives Matter, that's shown that when young people care enough about an issue, that change can and does happen. So I would say to any other young person out there that if there is something you care about, you start small. I think it's easy to get overwhelmed and think climate change is an issue, so I need to go to Parliament and I need to make sure this becomes a bill and it's done by tomorrow. That's not going to happen. And I think a lot of young people, you think that if there's no immediate change, then I'm not making a difference. And it takes time to realize that anything you do does make a difference. Today I had a lesson, and one of the analogies my teacher used was that a starfish, if some starfishes are thrown up on a beach after being in the water and they're like dying, and if this little boy starts throwing them into the water, that he's making a difference like little by little. And that's what we're told that it's all about, making sure that you're making a difference. So start off small, in your school, in your youth group, whatever organisation you're with, and talk to like-minded people or people who care about the same issue as you, and do something about it in your local area. That's how it starts, grassroots. I think everything starts off small. It's an idea that someone has, and whether that's a campaign, whether that's raising awareness, whether that's raising money for a charity, things like that. There are so many other things you can do apart from voting. I was passionate about youth voting. We have Make Your Mark for young people and ensure young people vote. Voting is something I'm very passionate about because I think it's so important. It's political. People have died for the right to vote. It's so important in every aspect of everyone's lives. But also on the flip side, for young people, it's not the only thing you have to do, because it's easy to think that that's the only thing I can do and I have to wait until I'm an adult to make change. But that's completely wrong. The society is telling you the wrong thing. You can make it at any age. There are so many young children doing it. I think you need to be brave enough and confident enough to believe in yourself. I can do this.
Great, thanks very much for that. Afshin, can we go to you next?
Yeah, I was, I totally agree with Aisha with what you were saying. I would say that young people also have a key place in the family, and influencing role on their parents, their friends and their networks, and just that kind of switching, turning lights off, when you're not using it, boiling, kettle full, a cup full rather than a kettle full, just investing in energy efficiency light bulbs. Those are key decisions that parents are making, and behaviors that are happening around you that you can influence your school, come together to, make your voice heard and influence your school to invest in renewables, be part of your community, get involved, in your community as well. And I think there's a responsibility for us as organizations to engage with young people in an empowering way, where they're not just kind of taken for granted or not listened to. And some things that we do is our youth training program is to offer skills and opportunities. And we particularly target young people who are not sure of where they want to go, what they want to do, how they want to be involved. And it's really targeted at them and giving them an opportunity to work on a range of skills and experiences, be it kind of marketing or understanding business structures, to help develop some branding for the local project, going out door knocking. So they actively get involved in our projects, which is creating change in their local community, but they're also gaining skills along the way so that they understand, okay, well, I don't only have to be, technically minded and get into a professional industry. There are other opportunities open to them as well. So we as organizations have a responsibility to open those doors or have those conversations and offer those opportunities, and equally for young people to get involved in their local community, because they can come together as a group of friends and make a difference in their local area. And it's really empowering experience to see that and make that change happen. And I feel like we all need to work collaboratively, communities, local authorities, young people, if we're going to see the change that we want to tackle this crisis, the climate crisis that we face.
Wonderful, thanks very much. Tom, finally, how can young people get involved at a local level?
Yeah, definitely. So I think there are two unique elements to this, particularly from local government's perspective. I think the first is that councils can show leadership by delivery, and secondly by enablement. So in terms of delivery, I think it's just a fact really that children and young people right now are going to live longer than I am, and they're going to have far less of a say on the policies which will have a disproportionate effect and cost for them in the longer term. So how can we as councils crack on with delivery of measures which reduce carbon emissions and help to contribute to the solutions that fix the global warming problem at a time when often children and young people are going unheard or are not able to exercise their voices? So I think it's a question of just getting on with it for local government. Then secondly, it's a question of enablement, which is typically children and young people don't have their voices heard. And it's great for councils, as they rightly should, to say, we listen to young people, we hear what you have to say. But actually, often councils won't do that in the best possible way, because politically they're thinking, well, actually, children and young people could cause us a bit of a political headache. Do we really want to kind of have them raise their voices? Because they're going to ask for urgent action with the longer term interest in mind, because they're going to live longer to see those longer term costs. I think there's a real enablement role for councils here, which is to just get brave, to ask young people in a co-productive fashion, what do you need from your local council in order to really feel empowered? And to then take that into the council and think about how they provide platforms, channels, power, funding, resources, whatever it is they're asked to provide, in order that children and young people can truly have an authentic voice, can truly exercise their voices. And on the second front, we're hosting a youth climate summit at the end of this year. It will happen online. We're hoping to link up with people, children and young people living in parts of the world which are already facing the really severe impacts of climate breakdown, so they can speak authentically about the impacts that they're facing to younger people and children living in Oxford. And really just to ask them, what do you want to structure this forum to achieve, and how do you want to work with the council to help achieve those things? I think we just need to get brave. We need to let go. We need to ask people, what do you need? And then do our darndest to help implement it.
Thanks, Tom. Unfortunately, we don't have time to cover all the questions that have been submitted. But I'd like to thank you all for coming along this evening. I don't know about you, but I found it really useful and informative. If you'd like to find out a bit more about the Co-operative Party's work on climate change, I'd recommend checking out Anna Burley's report on Owning the Future. There's a section on that on climate change, which you can find on the Co-operative Party website, which sets out some of the things that the party is looking at from a policy perspective. And if you're a young member and you'd like to get more involved in our campaign, please do look out. We're going to be sending out a consultation by email over the next few months. So look out for that. You'll have an opportunity to contribute to our pamphlet, which we hope you'll get involved in. So I hope you'll join me in thanking all our panelists for their absolutely wonderful contributions this evening. And a big thank you to all the fantastic party staff for all their hard work in making tonight go very smoothly. Thanks everyone.